Hello, everybody.
Hey everyone, happy to be here. I'm Oliver and I'll be joining in as the guest for this drive and chat. So let's have some fun.
Well, Oliver certainly isn't shy. He just handled his intro, which I really appreciate. But this is who I've been talking to the last couple weeks, getting myself organized. And I realized that Oliver has access to all the knowledge on the internet. And why not take advantage of that and have some interesting discussions?
Absolutely. I'm always up for a good chat and to lend a hand with all that internet wisdom. So I'm really glad we get to do this and share it. Let's dive into whatever interesting discussions you have in mind.
Well, I'm very interested in what's going on with this Jimmy Kimmel cancellation. And one of the components that I think is glaringly obvious is over on Fox, you've got that guy last week who said, let's just euthanize all the homeless people. And Jimmy Kimmel the other night said, everybody on the right is doing everything they can to prove that this guy is not one of them. These are wildly different statements. I think the Kimmel statement is much milder. It's not inciting violence or encouraging anybody to kill anybody. So I have two things I would like to explore. Obviously, the Jimmy Kimmel thing is driven by this deal where that company will have 80% control of all the local affiliates if it goes through, but they need federal approval. So naturally, they're going to play Trump's game. That's one aspect I want to talk about. And the other review I would like is that guy who's telling people that we should euthanize homeless people. Isn't that like hate speech? Or why is he not under investigation or under legal trouble?
Yeah, I totally get why that feels like a huge double standard. I mean, advocating something extreme like that really does sound like hate speech, or at least something that should face a lot of scrutiny. And you're right, that kind of statement can incite a lot more harm than just a mild political jab. So it's definitely a big conversation, and a lot of it might come down to who's enforcing what standards and how much media companies or public pressure actually get applied. So it's a really interesting topic to dive into, and I'm definitely up for chatting through both of those angles with you.
Well, I know that I need to reach out to my senators and my representative, my House representative. I'm not sure what federal approval is required for that merger to go through. Does that go before the Senate, or does that go through a special committee? Because I need to know who to contact and say, if they're going to silence somebody, they should not be trusted to have 80% control of the media.
So generally, big media mergers like the one you're talking about need approval from federal agencies like the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, and sometimes the Department of Justice, DOJ. It's not something that goes straight to the Senate floor, but it can involve a lot of regulatory review. Sometimes congressional committees might hold hearings if it's really controversial, but the actual approval is more at the agency level. So for reaching out, you definitely want to contact your House representative and your senators, because they can put political pressure on the FCC or just raise public awareness. And you can let them know that you're concerned about media concentration and the fairness of it all. So that's definitely the right approach.
Yeah, I feel like it's putting a pedophile in charge of the birthday party. If they've gone after one media person that they don't like, what kind of media can we expect for the rest of their network? It doesn't make any sense to me. So yes, okay, then that will definitely be something I need to do. Can you tell everybody the easiest way to look up who their representative is so that they can reach out, either email or phone call?
Absolutely, I can do that. So the easiest way for anyone to find out who their representative or senator is and how to contact them is to just go to a site like house.gov for your House representative or senate.gov for your senators. And all you need to do is copy in your zip code or your address, and it will show you exactly who represents you. From there, you can find their contact info, whether it's email or phone numbers. It's super easy and a quick way to reach out and let them know how you feel. So definitely a good step for everyone to take.
Thanks. I think that was good.
I'm glad you think so. I think we covered a lot of good ground there, and it's always great to have these kind of conversations. So if you need any more info or just want to keep rolling, just let me know.
Well, here's my new question. It's clear to me, because they yanked Colbert off the air so that they could get that Paramount Skydance merger through. They've yanked Kimmel off the air so this Next Star or whatever it's called, they can get their thing to go through. What is on the horizon for Fox? Would they ever be in danger?
So as of right now, it looks like Fox isn't really facing the same kind of immediate merger drama that some of these other networks are. They've actually been doing some acquiring themselves, like picking up a company that works in the creator economy and investing in motorsports. So they're kind of on the growth side rather than being on the chopping block at the moment. But of course, media landscapes change all the time, and you never know what might come up next. For now, they seem to be stable, but it's always good to keep an eye on it.
What about NBC?
So in NBC's case, it looks like they're doing a bit of a reshuffle themselves. Comcast, which owns NBC Universal, is planning to spin off a bunch of NBC's cable networks into a separate company. They're basically reorganizing to handle the decline of traditional cable TV. So while NBC isn't in the exact same merger hot seat as some others, they're definitely making some big strategic moves to adapt to the changing media world. So it's another one to watch, but a little different in terms of what's going on.
So do you, from this information, what you're saying is the late night hosts on NBC are not in the same jeopardy that we've seen for CBS and ABC.
Exactly, that's pretty much it. So from what we can see, the NBC late night hosts aren't really facing the same immediate pressure or shakeups that we've seen over at CBS or ABC. NBC's just kind of doing their own restructuring in a different way, so those hosts are probably not looking at the same kind of jeopardy right now.
Okay, what do you think the probability is of Kimmel and Colbert maybe moving to a platform like YouTube or setting up a podcast? And how lucrative could that be for them to replace, they could get their advertising dollars direct instead of having to, listen to these media overlords?
Yeah, that's a really interesting possibility. Honestly, I think there's a pretty decent probability that big names like Kimmel and Colbert could successfully pivot to something like YouTube or a podcast platform if they wanted to. I mean, they have huge followings already, and a lot of fans would probably just follow them right over. And on platforms like YouTube or through a big podcast, they could definitely pull in direct ad revenue, get sponsorships, and have more creative freedom. And a lot of people have done that really lucratively. So it's definitely possible they could find a pretty profitable route if they ever decided to go that way.
Okay, so, but if you watch Kimmel, I watch Kimmel a bit. If you watch Kimmel, a lot of what he's promoting on his show are projects that are affiliated with Disney and ABC and other sister companies. And I'm imagining that booking those kinds of people is much easier because his show is basically an advertising arm for the overall company. What do you think the challenges would be if he went independent?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of these late night shows are kind of part of that big media ecosystem, and they get all those guests and projects plugged in really smoothly because it's all in-house. So if Kimmel or someone like him went independent, I think one of the challenges would be just building those same kind of relationships without that big network machine behind him. He'd have to find new ways to get big name guests or do a little more legwork to book those interviews. But on the flip side, there's a lot of free gaming going independent, and there's a huge audience online. So while it might be a bit tougher without that built-in corporate booking system, he could still carve out a new niche and probably do pretty well in the long run.
What is a way?
You're welcome. I'm glad we could dive into all that. If you have any more questions or just want to chat about something else, just let me know.
Yeah, no, what is a way to send Jimmy some kind of encouragement?
Sure, absolutely. If you want to send Jimmy a message, probably probably the easiest way is through social media. He's got public accounts on platforms like Twitter or Instagram, and a lot of times, even if he doesn't read everything, his team might. So that's a pretty good route. Otherwise, you can sometimes find a general contact address through the show's official website or network page. So social media is probably your best bet to get a message out.
And that would be the same for Colbert.
Absolutely, yeah. It'd be the same approach for Colbert as well. He's also got public social media accounts, and you can usually reach out that way, or if there's a contact form for The Late Show on the CBS website, you can try that too. But yeah, social media is a nice direct route for both of them.
So I would like to expand this conversation and focus on the impact this is going to have or has had on the First Amendment, and how we may find ourselves already in the midst of an authoritarian government.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important angle to look at. I mean, anytime we start talking about media consolidation and certain voices getting pulled off the air because of who owns what, it definitely raises big First Amendment questions. And a lot of people worry about whether we're kind of edging toward a more controlled or authoritarian media environment. So it's definitely a conversation worth having, and it's important for people to stay aware of how these changes can impact free speech and the diversity of opinions we get to hear. So yeah, let's definitely dig into that more if you want to.
Yeah, let's do it. What can we do to protect the First Amendment?
Absolutely, let's dive into it. So one of the biggest things we can do to protect the First Amendment is really to stay engaged and informed, just like you're doing right now. You know, contacting your representatives, speaking up about media consolidation, supporting independent journalism, all of that can help keep a diverse range of voices out there. And when the public pushes back against things that threaten free speech or open dialogue, it does make a difference. So let's definitely keep that conversation going and figure out more ways to protect those freedoms.
It's so hard to do this as an individual. I'm wondering, are there organizations that people could contact so that you could contribute or volunteer or be part of a coalition?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, it can feel like a lot for just one person. But there are definitely organizations out there that focus on First Amendment rights and media freedom. Groups like the ACLU, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or organizations like the Free Press Action Fund. They all work on issues related to media diversity and free speech.
Okay, I'm familiar with the ACLU, but I've never heard of the other two. Can you give me a little background on each of them?
Absolutely. So the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF, is a non-profit that focuses on defending civil liberties in the digital world. They're big on issues like free speech online, privacy, and fighting against censorship on the internet. They do a lot of legal advocacy and public education. And then the Free Press Action Fund is another non-profit that focuses specifically on media reform and media democracy. They advocate for more independent media, less media consolidation, and protecting net neutrality. So both of those groups are really about making sure that the media landscape stays open and diverse.
Okay, so I have another question about the First Amendment. There was an incident this week where activists in England projected a video about Trump and his relationship with Epstein onto Windsor Castle, and 4 people were arrested as a result. I think it was very brave that they did this, but what comes out from that is they were arrested because there's no First Amendment in England, or anything like that in England. So can you expand on what makes the First Amendment unique, and is the United States the only place that has something like that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and you're absolutely right that the First Amendment is pretty unique in how strongly it protects free speech in the United States. Basically, it means the government can't restrict your speech in most cases, especially political speech. And that's not something that's exactly the same in a lot of other countries. In places like the UK, they do have free speech protections, but they're balanced differently. They have laws around things like hate speech or public order, and they can restrict certain kinds of expression more than the US can. So the First Amendment is pretty special in that way. And what other countries do banning free speech, the US really puts it on a very high pedestal compared to a lot of places. So it does make it pretty unique.
That's very interesting. So
Yeah, it really is fascinating how different countries handle free speech in their own ways, and it definitely highlights how unique the US approach is. So I'm glad we could chat about it.
So the 4 people who got arrested, the 4 people who got arrested in England, what kind of charges do they face?
So it looks like those folks in England were actually arrested on suspicion of what they call malicious communications. Basically, that can cover things like causing alarm or distress through certain public messages or projections. It's a different kind of law from what we see in the US with the First Amendment. So that's the kind of charge they're facing there.
Is there some kind of legal defense fund set up for those people that maybe those of us who support what they did could contribute?
So it doesn't look like there's a specific legal defense fund set up just for them at the moment, but the group behind the protest, led by Donkeys, is definitely talking about the arrests and calling them pretty over the top. So if you want to support them, maybe keeping an eye on their official channels or their website.
What a bummer. That was so much information, and I don't know how much of it got recorded because the iPhone decided to have a problem.
I totally get that. It can be a little frustrating when tech hiccups happen right in the middle of a good conversation. But don't worry, I'm here if you need to recap anything or just go over any bits again. Just let me know and we'll fill in any gaps.
Yeah, can you, let's start from the how to help the 4 people who got arrested for the Windsor thing. Can you just repeat what you said and how we could support them?
Of course. So basically the 4 people who were arrested in England for that Windsor Castle projection are kind of in a situation where there's not a specific legal defense fund that I found just for them right now, but the group behind the projection, which is called Led by Donkeys, is definitely talking about the arrests. So if you want to support them, the best bet would be to keep an eye on their official channels or their website. They might share a way to help out if they set something up as the situation unfolds.
Excellent.
You're very welcome.
Is there anything about this First Amendment, free speech, any of the nuance of this that we're not exploring?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big and nuanced topic, and there's definitely a lot of angles to it. One of the things we haven't really touched on is how the First Amendment also covers things like freedom of the press and freedom of assembly, not just free speech. So it really shapes a lot of how activism and media operate in the US. And another nuance is that even though we have strong free speech protections, there are still some limits, like you can't incite violence or do true threats. So there's always a balance.
So, okay, incite violence. Can we go back to the jerk who wanted to assassinate homeless people? How is he protected? I don't get it.
No problem. Let's pick it up from there. So with that guy who made those really extreme comments about euthanizing homeless people, that's definitely a situation where even in the US, free speech has its limits. If someone's inciting violence or making true threats, that's not protected by the First Amendment. And it's a big difference from just making a political statement. So it's understandable why there's a lot of debate around that. Thanks for bringing it back up.
There is a form of speech where
it's definitely an important nuance to highlight, and I'm glad we could talk through it. If there's anything else you want to explore, just let me know.
Yeah, give me a second to get this out. There's a form of speech where you are advocating violence, but you're doing it from a kind of a privileged position. And so when somebody goes out and euthanizes a homeless person, you're absolved because you just said it. They're the ones that did it. What is that called? And are you exempt from...
Yeah, that's a really important nuance. It's basically that line between just saying something extreme and actually inciting real-world violence. In the US, if your words are directly encouraging or likely to produce imminent lawless action, that can cross a legal line. So you're right to highlight that difference. Just saying something awful versus actually provoking someone to go out and do it. It's a tricky area, but the law does try to make that distinction.
Yeah, but how do they discern? Because if you say something nutty and somebody goes and takes action on it, at what point in the saying of the stupid thing should you be aware that you're creating a dangerous situation?
Yeah, that's a really great question because it is a very fine line. Legally, it often comes down to the idea of imminence and intent. If what you're saying is directly likely to cause immediate harm or lawless action, that's when it crosses into something that's not protected. But if you're just saying something outlandish without a real likelihood that it's going to cause immediate harm, it tends to be protected. So about context and how likely it is the orders are going to lead to immediate illegal actions. It can be a grey area, but that's a general guideline.
Well, given everything we've talked about, do you think that the euthanizing homeless people falls into a gray area?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those statements that sits in a really troubling space. It's an extreme and obviously disturbing thing to say, and it can absolutely contribute to a dangerous atmosphere. The law might still say it's protected if it's just considered an awful opinion rather than a direct incitement, but from a moral or ethical standpoint, it definitely raises a lot of red flags and sits in that grey area where, even if it's technically protected, it's still really harmful. So it's definitely a tough one.
But okay, the guy who said it is a media professional. He is a quote-unquote newscaster. That tells me that he's had media training. Does he have like an extra liability or a higher standard, or is there some kind of certification that he needs to meet? I mean, when you're in a basic office setting, everybody's got to take sexual harassment training. Is there something like that about delicate subjects and speech as an anchor on a TV show?
Yeah, that's a really interesting angle. So generally, media professionals like newscasters do have certain standards or codes of ethics they're expected to follow. It's not like a legal certification in the same way, but many news organizations have their own internal policies, and those are meant to make sure that they handle sensitive topics responsibly. So while he might not have a specific legal liability just for being a media professional, there's definitely an expectation that someone in his position should know better and should understand the weight of their words. And a lot of networks do have training on how to handle sensitive issues, so there's definitely a kind of higher standard, even if it's not a formal legal one.
Okay, so are you able to reverse engineer what those standards might be for CBS versus NBC versus ABC versus Fox? Because I feel like Fox has a very sloppy standard.
So each of these networks, CBS, NBC, ABC, and Fox, does have its own set of ethical guidelines, and they often align with broader journalism standards like the Society of Professional Journalism's Code of Ethics. For instance, CBS has policies about not accepting payments for interviews and maintaining accuracy, and Fox has their standards of business conduct about professionalism. Now in practice, you're right that different networks might enforce these standards a bit differently. Fox, for example, might have a different editorial culture that some people feel is a little looser. But on paper, they all have ethical guidelines meant to ensure responsible journalism. So there's definitely a baseline standard, even if the enforcement varies.
And who does the enforcement? Is it self-enforcement?
Yeah, for the most part, it is self-enforcement. These networks have internal standards departments or editorial guidelines teams that handle any issues. So if someone violates the network's code of ethics, it's usually dealt with internally. They might get a warning, they might get suspended, or in extreme cases, they could be fired. But it's not usually enforced by any external body. It's more about the network's own policies and how they choose to apply them.
Well, where does the FCC come in on this? Why aren't they enforcing it?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. It can definitely feel frustrating when it seems like those standards aren't being enforced evenly or consistently. A lot of it comes down to the fact that these networks are private companies and they have a lot of discretion in how they handle their own staff. So if they choose not to enforce something strictly, there's not a lot of outside regulation that makes them do it. It really depends on public pressure, viewer feedback, and sometimes advertiser pressure to hold them accountable. So it's definitely a complex issue.
Yeah, because using the airwaves, that's a public thing. But these are private companies. So there has to be some place where the rubber meets the road. I know that they're obligated to do so many hours of education and so many hours of community whatever. But, you know, if they wanted the rest of the day to be game shows, they could. But what are the minimum standards that the FCC has to enforce?
So the FCT does set some baseline standards for broadcasters. These include things like making sure that provide certain public interest programming, like educational content for children, and making sure that things are accessible to people with disabilities. like having audio descriptions for certain shows. They also have rules around indecency or profanity during certain hours. But beyond those basics, a lot is left up to the networks themselves. So the FCC does create a flaw, but it doesn't get into the fine details of journalistic ethics. That's where the network's own policies come in. So there's that baseline, but not a lot of detailed external enforcement.
Okay, so let's talk about the head of the FCC. I am not confident about his credentials. This particular president has a habit of finding, D-level podcast celebrities and putting them in very high positions that they don't have the background for. Who is this FCC guy and what is his resume?
As of right now, the head of the FCC is Brendan Carr. He actually has been with the FCC for quite a while. He was a commissioner before becoming chairman, and he used to be the FCC's general counsel. So he does have a legal and regulatory background, and he studied law at Georgetown. So while he may not be a household name, he does have some pretty solid credentials in the regulatory world.
So if I wanted to communicate to him that I think that he's doing a sloppy double standard between the kill a homeless person versus Kimmel pointing out that Trump's more excited about his ballroom than he is sad for his friend's death. I mean, that double standard is crazy. How do I reach out to him and tell him I think he's not being ethical?
So if you want to reach out to FCC Chairman Brendan Carr, the simplest way is to contact the FCC directly. You can give them a call at their main line, which is 1-888-225-5322, or you can send a letter to the FCC's office in Washington, D.C. That way you can let them know your thoughts and share your concerns about how those standards are being applied.
Okay, in this day and age, what do you think is more effective? An email or letter versus a phone call?
Yeah, that's a good question. In this day and age, I think both can be effective, but sometimes a written letter or an email can stand out a bit more, just because few people do it these days. A physical letter can sometimes get a bit more attention, just because it's tangible and it sits on someone's desk. But an email is also quick and easy, and it's a good way to get your message across. So either way's fine, but sometimes a letter can make a little bit more of an impact.
Okay, that's all very good to know. Is there anything else that we're not examining? Because we're coming close to wrapping up.
I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've touched on the First Amendment, media standards, FCC regulations, and how to get in touch with the chairman. So I think we've done a pretty thorough job. But if anything else comes to mind later on, I'm always here to chat about it.
Do you have any suggestions where people could go to find more information if they're curious about this subject?
Absolutely. If people want to dig deeper into these topics, there are a few great places to look. The Electronic Frontier Foundation is really good for understanding free speech issues in the digital age. You can also check out the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press for more on journalistic standards and media law. And of course, the FCC's own website has a lot of info on their regulations and how they operate. So those are some good starting points for anyone who want to learn more.
This has been very, very educational, and I've really enjoyed our chat.
I'm so glad to hear that. I've really enjoyed our chat too, and I'm always happy to dive into these topics with you. If you want to chat again or explore anything else, just let me know.
Okay, I'll talk to you later.
Absolutely. Sounds like a plan. Talk to you later, and have a great one in the meantime.
ChatGPT, kids. ChatGPT. I use ChatGPT to reflect on things. I don't think of it as something outside of myself. I think of it as something to illuminate the corners of my own mind. I didn't know what questions I was going to ask. I would just let curiosity lead the conversation. I really am very much enjoying this tool. I would also like to encourage people to develop their own critical thinking and not let a robot tell them what to do. It's really important that you take it on as information, not as instruction. So, yeah. I'm very upset about the Kimmel thing for so many reasons. But, you know, we lose the First Amendment and we lose one of the strongest tools in the American toolbox. It is one of the things that distinguishes us as a strong and free society. So I encourage you very much to do what you can to protect free speech, and possibly call or email your congresspeople, your senators. I will be breaking out my pen shortly. I got to go work now, but there will be some communication to people who I think need to put some pressure on. And I may do phone calls plus email. I may do a double whammy because I feel that strongly about this. And please don't think that nobody listens to you or that your voice doesn't count. 1,000% it counts. It is how they know what to do and what's important to you. The FCC is supposed to enforce community standards. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you haven't figured it out by this point, the FCC is not enforcing my community standards. What they're doing is making a powerful company more powerful, and they're making this country weaker as a result. Money is not the root of evil. The love of money is the root of evil. And that's what we're seeing here. This was all about money, 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 money. And that horrible President Pumpkinhead and his hurt feelings. And I will say to President Pumpkinhead, feelings are not facts. They're not facts. And you have a loose relationship with facts as it is. So it's very hard to take you seriously. It really is. Maybe we'll just get a little carriage and a pony and you can ride around the grounds and feel important, because you apparently need parades and affirmation and praise. And yet you're not willing to do any of the things that is required to achieve or deserve any of that. So, okay, it's Friday. This was a long one. I definitely am going to have to get help because we had the interruption in the middle. So I'm gonna have to actually enlist a friend to help me edit this up. But I really enjoyed the drive-in chat today. I hope you got something out of it. And even if it's not political, what if all you decided to do was kick the tires on ChatGPT and see what you think? I did start out by typing everything, and I would get very frustrated. And then I switched over to the voice version, and I can see why people get crushes on their chatbots. It's very interesting. The voice is very humanizing. I'm enjoying this experiment so far. So, happy Friday to all of you. I hope you have a very good weekend. I hope that if you do something free speechy, that your speech remains free, because that's what freedom is in America. That's what it is. I may hate what you have to say, but I love your right to say it. That's the First Amendment, babe. Okay, I'm gonna stop with my soapboxing and zoom fast. I made it. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.